The victims did not know each other. The crimes occurred in different states. And yet, there was a pattern that took years to recognize, a pattern that revealed a single, horrifying truth. Before law enforcement had a name, before they had a suspect, they had a series of seemingly unrelated tragedies. How did one person manage to commit so many crimes across such vast distances without being caught? It all came down to a carefully constructed method, a chillingly consistent approach that allowed him to move like a ghost through society. Today, we're breaking down the crimes and the pattern of Ted Bundy. In early 1974, a series of disappearances began to draw attention in the Pacific Northwest. Young women, mostly college students, started vanishing in Washington and Oregon. They disappeared without witnesses, without clear crime scenes, and without immediate leads. At the time, each case was handled as a separate local tragedy. No one suspected a connection. The first widely noted case was Linda Ann Healy, a student at the University of Washington who vanished from her basement apartment in February. Over the next few months, more women disappeared under similarly baffling circumstances. Dana Gail Monson, Susan Elaine Rancourt, Roberta Kathleen Parks, Brenda Carovol, and Georgianne Hawkins. They were all young, bright, and had promising futures. They vanished from college campuses, from parks, and even from well-lit alleyways near their dorms. The lack of evidence was frustrating for investigators and terrifying for the public. Fear began to spread across the region, but the true scale of the problem remained hidden. No one yet understood they were dealing with a single predator. Ted Bundy rarely used force during his initial contact. Instead, he relied on deception and a carefully crafted image of harmlessness. He often pretended to be injured, wearing a cast on his arm or leg, or using crutches. He would then politely ask for help carrying books to his car, or help loading a sailboat onto his vehicle's roof rack. He chose public spaces, often during daylight hours, where people's guards were down. He looked like a clean-cut, respectable college student or young professional. He was well-spoken, charming, and didn't fit the stereotypical image of a dangerous criminal. This performance of vulnerability was his most powerful weapon. It disarmed his intended victims, making them feel safe and willing to offer assistance to someone who appeared to be in need. By exploiting social trust and kindness, he lured them into a situation where they were completely vulnerable, turning a simple act of courtesy into a deadly trap. This calculated approach allowed him to operate in plain sight again and again. Over time, investigators began to notice disturbing similarities among the victims. Many of them were young, white women, typically in their late teens or early 20s. A significant number were college students. A striking detail that later emerged was that several had long hair parted in the middle, a style common at the time but one that seemed to be a recurring feature. The locations where they were last seen also formed a pattern. They were approached in places generally considered safe: busy college campuses, public parks, sunny beaches, and shopping areas. These were not dark, isolated alleys late at night. These were everyday places where people went about their lives. This realization was chilling. The predator wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was moving among them, using the very normality of these settings as his camouflage. The common threads were too strong to be a coincidence. It became clear that this was not a series of random, isolated incidents. A single, methodical individual was targeting a specific type of victim in a predictable yet terrifying way. During the early 1970s, the concept of a serial killer, as we understand it today, was not widely recognized, even within law enforcement. The idea that one individual could be responsible for a string of crimes across different states was a novel and challenging concept. At that time, Police departments largely worked independently. Information sharing between different jurisdictions, let alone different states, was limited and slow. There was no centralized federal database for violent crimes like the one we have today. Bundy exploited this fragmented system to his advantage. He frequently moved between Washington, Utah, and later Colorado and Florida, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. As a new series of crimes began in one state, local police would start their investigation from scratch, unaware of similar patterns that had already emerged elsewhere. This lack of coordination and communication between agencies was a critical factor that allowed the crimes to continue for so long without anyone connecting the dots. He was able to stay one step ahead of the law simply by crossing a state line. As time went on, the frequency of the disappearances increased dramatically. In some periods, especially during the summer of 1974, cases occurred only weeks or even days apart. The boldness grew. The attack at Lake Sammamish State Park in Washington was a shocking example. On a single sunny afternoon in July, he approached multiple women, successfully abducting two of them, Janice Otiti and Denise Naslan, from a crowded public park. This escalation showed a predator who was becoming more confident, more driven, and taking greater risks. Despite this terrifying hidden life, Bundy maintained a flawless public facade. He was a student at the University of Washington and later a law student in Utah. He worked at a crisis hotline, ironically helping people in distress. He was involved in politics. He socialized and had a steady girlfriend. Nothing in his daily life, nothing he showed to his friends, family, or colleagues gave any hint of the unimaginable violence he was committing. This duality was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all the ability to live a completely normal life on the surface, while secretly acting as one of history's most prolific killers. Slowly, the first glimmers of a connection began to surface. Witnesses who had been approached but managed to get away started coming forward. Their descriptions, though varied, began to converge on a few key details. They mentioned a charming, handsome man who often wore a cast. They mentioned a name, Ted. Several witnesses also described his vehicle, a light-colored Volkswagen Beetle. A familiar request for help was a common theme in their stories. These tips started reaching investigators in different jurisdictions. A composite sketch was created and circulated. While there was still no definitive proof linking one person to all the crimes, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align. The image of the suspect was becoming clearer, evolving from a vague shadow into a more defined figure. The pattern was no longer just a statistical similarity in victimology. It was now tied to a specific method, a specific car, and a potential first name. The net was starting to form, even if the investigators didn't yet know who they were trying to catch. The pattern was finally emerging from the chaos, and with that pattern came the terrifying realization that these were not random acts of violence or separate disappearances. A single, elusive predator was at work, moving methodically across the country. In our next episode, we will follow the investigation itself. Enforcement from different states finally began to connect the cases. How they sifted through thousands of tips to identify potential suspects, and how they slowly, painstakingly closed in on a man named Ted Bundy. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next.